A millionaire CEO asks a poor janitor dad to be her husband for just one day. Caleb only agrees on one shocking condition, and what happens in that courtroom changes both their families forever. This is a story of love, sacrifice, and courage you won't forget. Now let's dive in. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the marble lobby, their cold glow bouncing off the polished floor as Caleb Thompson pushed his mop with steady, practiced strokes. Each sweep was deliberate, not out of pride for the job, but because he knew the paycheck behind it kept his daughter safe for another week. His shoulders burned with fatigue, yet he carried it like armor. The building stood tall, glass and steel gleaming against the midnight sky, but Caleb was invisible inside it. Executives walked these halls by day with heads high and shoes clicking in importance. By night, only the janitor remained, filling the silence with the scrape of a mop bucket and the echo of his weary footsteps. To the world, he was unseen. To one small girl asleep in a tiny apartment across town, he was everything. Emma, his reason for every aching muscle, every skipped meal, every long night where exhaustion begged him to stop. She was 7 years old, with tangled curls that smelled faintly of vanilla shampoo and eyes that held more trust than Caleb felt he deserved. Her laughter was his sunrise, and her small hand in his was the strength that pulled him through storms. In the breast pocket of his uniform rested a photograph, edges frayed, colors fading. His wife's smile stared back at him from another time, a time before sickness stole her warmth and left Caleb with a baby in his arms. He touched that photograph often, as if by pressing it he could bring back her voice, her comfort, her steady presence. But all that remained was memory, and a promise he refused to break. Every night, no matter how long, the shift or how heavy his bones, he returned home, knelt by Emma's bed, and whispered the same vow. "You'll never feel alone. Not as long as I'm breathing." He spoke it like a prayer, a shield against the loneliness that threatened to swallow them both. Tonight, as he worked, his eyes lingered on the tall glass doors of the lobby. Behind them, the city glimmered with wealth and movement, a world that had no place for janitors. He wondered, not for the first time, if Emma would grow up resenting what little he could give her. His chest tightened, the thought almost unbearable. A faint sound broke his spiral of doubt. The soft creak of the lobby's revolving door. Caleb paused mid-swipe, his mop dripping water onto the polished floor. No one was supposed to be here at this hour. He stood still, every nerve alert. The sound faded, leaving only the hum of the lights. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Imagination. That was all. Still, he couldn't shake the unease. The building was cavernous at night, its shadows too long, its silence too sharp. He returned to his work, though his eyes kept darting toward the glass entrance. His mind wandered to Emma again. She had asked tonight, before bed, why he always came home smelling like chemicals. He told her with a forced smile that it was the smell of hard work, but deep inside the question clawed at him. Would she one day see his uniform as shame, rather than sacrifice? The bucket wheels squeaked as he pushed it toward another stretch of marble. His reflection stared back at him from the floor. A tired man in a faded blue uniform, lines etched into his face that weren't from age alone. He studied that reflection for a moment, almost a stranger, until the weight of his daughter's trust anchored him again. A sudden gust rattled the glass doors, echoing through the lobby like a whisper. Caleb stiffened. He wasn't alone. Or was? Huh? His grip on the mop handle tightened, his breath shallow. Moments stretched, the sound of his heartbeat louder than the hum of the lights. Then silence returned. He shook it off, telling himself he was being foolish. But something lingered, a feeling that this night would not be like the others. He could sense it in the stillness, in the way the shadows seemed to lean closer, waiting. Caleb bent to wring out his mop, his calloused hands working with practiced care. The water dripped back into the bucket, rippling outward like circles spreading through his life, circles of struggle, of loss, of love. He thought of Emma's tiny hand slipping into his that morning, her sleepy voice whispering, "Daddy, don't be late." He wasn't late. Not yet, but he feared the day might come when his strength would falter, when promises would be broken. He closed his eyes, drawing a breath deep into his lungs, pushing back the ache of fear. The photograph pressed against his chest felt heavier now, as if it too sensed the weight of the path he was walking. He touched it again, and in the cold lobby he felt his wife's absence sharper than ever. He whispered her name under his breath, as if the empty space might answer. A sound echoed. This time, real, not imagined. Soft footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Caleb straightened, eyes narrowing toward the lobby doors. He wasn't alone. Someone was here. His pulse quickened. Not with fear, but with the instinct of a father who had everything to lose. He gripped the mop handle as though it were a weapon, waiting, listening, heart pounding. Whoever had entered the building was coming closer. The night had always been predictable. Mop, bucket, silence. But tonight, something shifted in the air. A moment was unfolding, one that would change not just his shift, but the course of his entire life. And Caleb, standing alone in that gleaming lobby, had no idea that the footsteps drawing nearer would ask him a question no man could ever be prepared to answer. The footsteps grew louder, steady, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who did not belong. In the silent hours of the lobby, Caleb stood frozen, his knuckles white around the mop handle, his heartbeat quickening with every echo that closed the distance. He expected a security guard, perhaps a late executive, maybe even someone who had lost their way. But when the figure stepped from the shadows, it was not who he imagined at all. Isabella Grant, the woman who owned not just this building, but half the skyline beyond its glass walls. She carried herself the way newspapers described her, sharp, composed and untouchable. Her tailored coat shimmered faintly beneath the sterile light, and her heels clicked softly against the marble floor. Caleb had seen her picture in magazines, her name scrawled across financial reports, but never this close, and certainly never like this. At midnight, alone, with shadows clinging to her face as though she were hiding something from the world. For a moment, neither spoke. She studied him, her eyes flicking from the mop to the man who held it with more defiance than submission. Caleb swallowed hard, trying to mask the tension in his posture. He wasn't used to being seen by people like her. He wasn't sure he wanted to be. Then something unexpected happened. Her gaze shifted, not at him, but beyond him. Emma, Caleb's daughter, curled up on a chair in the corner of the lobby, too tired to wait in the apartment tonight. She had begged to come, and Caleb had reluctantly agreed, letting her nap on a blanket while he worked. At that moment, Emma stirred, and Caleb instinctively knelt to tie the fraying lace of her tiny sneaker before she could trip. His hands worked carefully, gently, as Emma's sleepy eyes fluttered open, catching her father's quiet smile. Isabella's expression faltered. The world knew her as cold steel wrapped in elegance, a woman who never bowed to competition, who built empires without blinking. But as she watched too, that simple, ordinary moment, a father tying his daughter's shoelace, something in her chest twisted. It was a gesture she hadn't witnessed in years, not since Sophie's father had passed, leaving her to raise their daughter under the scrutiny of people who questioned if she could balance boardrooms and bedtime stories. Her in-laws called her heartless. Her critics called her obsessed with power. And tomorrow, in a courtroom filled with lawyers and accusations, they would argue that Sophie belonged with them, not with her. The thought hollowed her, a fear no diamond watch or sharp heel could protect her from. She clenched her jaw, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Caleb rose, brushing Emma's hair back tenderly before returning to his mop. He didn't notice the storm unraveling in Isabella's mind. She took a step closer, then another, the echo of her heels mingling with the squeak of the bucket wheels. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice low but steady. Caleb froze. His name had never sounded so sharp, as though pulled from lips unused to speaking to janitors. He straightened, his eyes guarded. "Yes, ma'am?" Her gaze softened, just slightly, as it lingered on Emma before returning to him. 1,000 words seemed to flicker behind her eyes, but only one question pressed its way out, trembling yet resolute. "If you were asked to be a husband, just for a single day, would you?" Caleb blinked. For a moment he wondered if exhaustion was playing tricks on him. He set the mop aside, studying her face, trying to catch a smirk, a sign of jest. But Isabella's expression was carved from sincerity, raw and unpolished in a way that startled him. "Excuse me." His voice was steady, but inside, confusion spiraled. She inhaled sharply, as if steadying herself against her own audacity. "Tomorrow I stand in court to prove I can keep my daughter. My late husband's family is determined to take her from me. They see me as nothing but a woman chained to her empire, incapable of love. They want to strip Sophie away because I don't fit their idea of a mother." Her voice cracked. Edit Sophie's name, but she pressed on. "If the judge sees a stable home, A husband beside me, a father figure for Sophie. It will strengthen my case. Caleb's jaw tightened. The mop water stilled in the bucket beside him, reflecting the impossible weight of her words. A millionaire CEO standing in front of a janitor, asking him to play the role of her husband. It was madness. It was unthinkable. Yet the way her eyes shimmered, almost breaking through her practiced composure, told him this was no scheme. This was desperation. A mother fighting for her child. Emma stirred again, rubbing her eyes and whispering, "Daddy." Caleb hushed her softly, smoothing her hair. But Isabella's gaze locked on the scene, her breath catching. She envied the simplicity of it. The ease with which this man, invisible to the world, radiated love strong enough to be seen in the smallest of gestures. "Please," Isabella whispered, the single word carrying more weight than all the speeches she had given in towering boardrooms. Caleb felt the lobby shrink around him. His hands were rough, his suit non-existent, his bank account nearly empty. And yet, in that moment, this untouchable woman was asking him to step into a life he had never dared to imagine. The air between them grew taut, as if the walls themselves leaned in, waiting for his response. Caleb opened his mouth, but no words came. His thoughts tangled between disbelief and the instinct to protect his own daughter from being entangled in someone else's war. Still, there it was, the impossible question hanging in the midnight air, a question that could alter not only Isabella's fate, but his own. And before the silence broke, before Caleb could even decide whether to laugh, refuse, or consider, Emma's small hand slipped into his. Her trust anchored him once more, while Isabella's eyes pleaded for an answer. The night had shifted, the impossibles had been spoken aloud, and Caleb Thompson realized, with a chill running down his spine, that his world would never be the same again. Caleb's throat tightened as Isabella's words settled, between them like a storm cloud refusing to pass. A husband, for one day. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh, yet there was nothing humorous in the weight of her gaze. The sterile lobby air suddenly felt heavy, pressing on his chest until every breath came slow and deliberate. His first instinct was to believe she had lost her mind. He was a janitor with bleach on his hands, not a man meant to stand beside someone like her. The gulf between them was wider than the marble floors they stood on, yet her request clung to him like a stubborn shadow. She stepped closer, the faint perfume of roses and steel surrounding her. "It doesn't have to be complicated," she said, though her trembling voice betrayed the truth. "Just one day, just long enough for them to see I can give Sophie what she needs." Caleb's jaw tightened as he glanced at Emma, still curled in the corner, her little hand clutching her blanket. His daughter had never asked for much, just love, stability, and the small comforts he scraped together. Isabella continued, her composure slipping. "You'll be compensated. More money than you could imagine." The words were sharp, clinical, spoken like a woman who had solved problems with cash her entire life. Caleb looked down at his calloused fingers gripping the mop handle, the faint scars from years of hard labor etched into his skin. His mind flickered to the overdue rent notices shoved under his apartment door, the hospital bills stacked like accusations on his kitchen counter, and Emma's worn-out sneakers patched with tape because new ones weren't in the budget. The offer should have been irresistible, but money wasn't what caught in his chest. It was Sophie, Isabella's daughter. He had seen her only once, in photographs splashed across glossy magazines beside her mother, but the mention of her now, paired with the raw edge in Isabella's voice, summoned an image. That unsettled him. A girl on the verge of being ripped from the one parent she had left, her eyes wide with the same lonely fear he had seen in Emma's after her mother's death. He swallowed hard, his thoughts tangling. Could he stand in court, pretending to be a husband, when his life was already a fragile balancing act? Could he risk dragging Emma into a storm far greater than either of them was prepared for? He turned slowly, his eyes locking on Isabella's. The power and polish she wore like armor were cracked now, revealing something rare. Vulnerability. It was not the face of a CEO commanding millions. It was the face of a mother standing on the edge of losing everything. Caleb's voice was low, roughened by hesitation. "You're asking me to lie. To stand in front of a judge and pretend to be something I'm not." Isabella flinched, but she held his gaze, refusing to retreat. "I'm asking you to protect a child," she whispered, her voice breaking, "because without help, I might lose her." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Caleb ran a hand across his tired face, his mind racing faster than his tongue could form words. Every logical thought screamed at him to walk away, to protect Emma from the chaos of a world that didn't belong to them. And yet, Sophie's name hung in the air, pulling at him like an invisible thread. He saw Emma again in his memory, her tiny body trembling in his arms the night she begged him not to let anyone else take her away after her mother's funeral. The fear of abandonment, the desperate clinging to the only parent left. That was a wound he understood too well. Caleb turned to Emma now, her sleepy face pressed against her blanket. She trusted him with her whole world. And what kind of father would he be if he turned his back on another child who needed protection? His chest rose and fell heavily. And then, against all expectation, "Hi." His lips parted with words that stunned even him. "I'll do it." Isabella's breath caught audibly. She blinked once, twice, as though she hadn't heard him correctly. You will?" she asked, her voice trembling more than before. Caleb nodded slowly, his eyes steady, but not for the money. He stepped forward, his tone gaining strength, each word carved with conviction. "I'll do it so Sophie feels safe, so she knows someone is standing beside her mother when the world tries to tear her away. That's the only reason I'll agree." Isabella's throat tightened, and for the first time her eyes shimmered with something dangerously close to tears. But Caleb wasn't finished. His gaze flicked back to Emma, and his voice softened with a different kind of gravity. "On one condition. Emma comes with me. She sits there in that courtroom, and she sees it happen, because she needs to know what courage looks like, even if it's borrowed for a day." The words landed between them like a vow, unpolished but unshakable. Isabella's composure faltered again, her lips parting in quiet astonishment. This janitor, this man who had nothing to his name but grit and love, was demanding something not for himself, but for his daughter. And in that demand, he revealed more strength than most men in her world of power ever showed. The marble lobby seemed to shrink, the hum of the lights above paling beneath the silence that followed. Isabella's chest rose and fell quickly, her mind racing. She had expected bargaining, greed, hesitation. What she received instead was something she hadn't anticipated at all. Integrity. Caleb stood unflinching, as though the absurdity of his decision was outweighed by the weight of his heart. For the first time in years, Isabella felt the ground shift beneath her certainty. She had built her life on deals, transactions, and strategies, but this man's decision was none of those things. It was raw, uncalculated, and terrifyingly real. And as Emma stirred in the corner, her small hand tightening around the edge of her blanket, Isabella realized with a jolt that the janitor had not only agreed to her impossible request, he had changed the rules entirely. The night air thickened, brimming with a sense of inevitability. Somewhere beyond the glass walls of the skyscraper, the city pulsed with life, unaware that within its towering heart, two lives had collided in a way neither could undo. Caleb had spoken his answer. The shocking decision was made, but neither of them yet understood how deeply it would reshape every tomorrow that followed. The morning of the hearing arrived with a weight that clung to Caleb's shoulders like iron chains. Sleep had been scarce. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sophie's frightened face and Emma's hopeful one, colliding in his mind like two fragile worlds depending on him. As he adjusted the borrowed suit jacket, a size too big, the sleeves brushing over his knuckles, he caught his reflection in the cracked mirror above his sink. A janitor dressed for war. The thought made his stomach twist, but he straightened his tie anyway. Isabella arrived at his door promptly, her presence filling the dingy hallway with a sharp elegance that didn't belong among peeling paint and flickering lights. She looked at him, her gaze lingering longer than expected. For the first time, her eyes weren't assessing him like a pawn on a chessboard. They were searching, almost grateful. She said nothing, only offered a nod, as if words would have been too fragile to hold the moment. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone walls cold and imposing, as though daring them to prove they belonged inside. Caleb's palms were clammy, but when Emma slipped her small hand into his, he felt something steadier than courage. Responsibility. Isabella walked a step ahead, her heels clicking a rhythm of defiance against the marble floors. Sophie pressed close to her side, her little fingers nervously clutching the hem of her mother's blazer. Inside. In the courtroom, the air was sharper than the autumn chill outside. Lawyers shuffled papers, judges whispered in hushed tones, and Isabella's in-laws sat poised with smug certainty, their suits flawless, their smirks rehearsed. They looked at Isabella with thinly veiled contempt, their eyes sliding over Caleb with open disdain, as though a man in a borrowed suit could never alter the outcome of anything. When the proceedings began, the attacks came quickly, like knives aimed at Isabella's every vulnerable seam. Her in-laws painted her as cold, distant, more married to her empire than to her child. They twisted her success into selfishness, her strength into neglect, their words dripping with venomous conviction. Sophie shrank in her seat, her small shoulders trembling as though each accusation chipped away at her world. Caleb sat frozen at first, his jaw tight, his fists clenched in his lap. His instinct screamed to protect, but his fear whispered louder. What if he wasn't enough? Then Sophie turned, her eyes wide and wet, searching for something, anything in him. And in that fragile glance, he remembered Emma's face years ago, begging him not to let anyone take her away. The same plea lived in Sophie's eyes now. When his name was called, Caleb rose, the scrape of the wooden chair echoing through the chamber. His knees felt unsteady, but his resolve was iron. He stepped forward, his mismatched suit drawing smirks from Isabella's in-laws. The judge regarded him with a measured look, pen poised, waiting for something to justify his presence. Caleb cleared his throat, his voice rough but steady. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a man of wealth or power. I don't have a list of titles or accolades." A murmur rippled through the room, some amused, some dismissive. He continued, undeterred, "But I know what it means to raise a child when the world tries to take more than it gives. I know what it means to stay up late after long shifts, helping with homework under a dim light, because your child deserves more than tired excuses." The courtroom stilled, the silence heavy. Caleb's words were not polished, but they carried weight. He spoke of Emma's scraped knees, of patching old shoes when money ran thin, of showing up day after day because love wasn't about luxury, it was about presence. Every example was humble, yet each one cut through the room sharper than any rehearsed argument. He glanced toward Sophie, her small hands clutching tightly to the bench. Children don't need perfect parents. They don't need riches or flawless homes. They need someone who stays, someone who fights when everything else tells them to give up. His gaze flicked toward Isabella, and for the first time, his words softened. "I've seen this mother fight for her child, even when pride begged her to stand alone. That is not unfit. That is love." Sophie's lips trembled, her eyes shimmering as she reached out across the gap, her tiny hand finding Caleb's as if it had always been there. Gasps rose from the gallery, murmurs rushing like wind through the courtroom. Isabella's in-laws shifted uncomfortably, their polished arguments unraveling against something they couldn't buy or fabricate. Authentic truth. The judge leaned forward, studying the trio before him, the polished CEO with cracks of vulnerability showing, the janitor with raw honesty in his stance, and the little girl whose fear had eased into fragile hope. The pen tapped against the desk once, twice, before the judge spoke, his voice even but decisive. Custody remains with the mother. The ruling landed like a thunderclap. Isabella's in-laws stiffened, their smug confidence evaporating into silence. Sophie buried her face against her mother, sobbing not in despair, but in relief. Isabella's eyes closed, her breath shaking, her hand finding Sophie's hair in trembling strokes. From the back, Emma's chest swelled, her small fists curled in pride. She had just watched her father, a Janitor, a man overlooked by the world, turn love into something larger than circumstance. Her eyes glistened, a spark igniting in her that whispered she could face anything, because courage had been modeled right before her. And as Caleb stood there, Sophie's hand still wrapped in his, Isabella's gaze found his across the courtroom. For the first time, it wasn't a transaction or a desperate plea binding them. It was something deeper, something unnamed, yet impossible to ignore. The day was far from over, but one truth had already taken root. Nothing in their lives would ever be the same. The courthouse doors swung shut behind them, and for a moment silence reigned in the cool autumn air. The battle was over. Custody had been secured. Yet as Isabella clutched Sophie's hand and Caleb guided Emma down the courthouse steps, there was no grand celebration, no triumphant applause. only the soft weight of relief settling over them like a blanket after a long storm. The marriage they had staged for a single day was over the second they stepped onto the cracked pavement, but something far more enduring remained, an invisible thread weaving between them. Isabella turned to Caleb, her polished exterior cracked with exhaustion, gratitude, and something she hadn't felt in years. Humility. She opened her mouth, the familiar urge to solve things with money pushing against her chest. A check, she thought. That was what men like him needed. But when she saw Emma's bright, hopeful eyes watching her father, when she caught Caleb's steady, unpretentious stance, she couldn't bring herself to cheapen what he had done. Instead, her voice softened, almost unfamiliar to her own ears. "Come to dinner," she said simply. Caleb blinked, taken aback. Of all the things he expected, the brush-off, the envelope of cash, the return to their separate lives, an invitation to her home was not one of them. He glanced at Emma, who lit up instantly, her small face glowing with excitement at the thought of something as ordinary yet extraordinary as dinner at a place that wasn't dimly lit and worn down. For H, it was a fairy tale. For him, it was a test. Still, he nodded. All right, dinner. That night, Isabella's mansion, so often a hollow echo chamber of power and silence, filled with the small, unpolished sounds of life. Sophie and Emma bonded instantly, their laughter carrying through the halls as though they had been sisters all along. They chased each other through corridors once haunted by loneliness, their giggles bouncing off marble floors and chandeliers with more warmth than the house had ever known. Isabella watched them, her chest tightening. She had thought wealth could provide everything Sophie needed. Yet, watching the girls play, she realized it wasn't toys or tutors Sophie had been missing. It was companionship, presence, and the simplicity of being seen. At the dinner table, Caleb sat across from her, shoulders slightly stiff, his mop-worn hands resting awkwardly against the polished wood. The silverware gleamed. The meal was prepared by chefs, yet he ate with quiet gratitude, offering small compliments, not about the richness of the food, but about the laughter it allowed. "It's good to hear them happy," he murmured, watching the girls with softened eyes. Isabella found herself laughing then. Not the sharp, polite chuckle she used in boardrooms, but a genuine laugh that startled even her. One dinner turned into another. What began as gratitude evolved into routine. Caleb still returned to his mop and bucket, but something about his posture shifted. He no longer hunched beneath the weight of being overlooked. His back was straighter, his steps steadier, his eyes brighter. Emma noticed first. "You smile more, Daddy," she whispered one night as he tucked her in, and Caleb had no answer, only a smile that deepened with the truth he couldn't deny. Weeks later, the roles subtly reversed. It wasn't Isabella arriving with legal battles or desperate pleas. It was H. Standing uncertainly in the lobby of the skyscraper where he still worked. She held 2 steaming cups of coffee, an awkwardness clinging to her posture that made her look younger, almost fragile. Caleb straightened from his mop, brows lifting in surprise. "You here to fire me for leaving Streaks?" he joked. She smiled, not the cold, polished smile of the CEO, but something softer. Handing him the coffee, she spoke 3 words that caught him entirely off guard. "Teach me, Caleb." He blinked, confused. "Teach you what?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Teach me how to love as simply as you do. How to see the small things. How to give without expecting anything back." The vulnerability in her tone disarmed him more than any argument ever could. For once, the woman who had conquered boardrooms and bent empires to her will stood before him not as a titan, but as a woman searching for something she had lost long ago. Caleb stared at her, the mop handle firm in his hands, his calloused fingers tracing grooves worn from years of labor. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity, the millionaire asking the janitor to teach her about love, yet the sincerity in her eyes told him she wasn't joking. And so he nodded, his voice low but certain. "Then start by showing up, every day, not with money, not with power, just with presence. That's where it begins." From then on, their worlds began to blend. Sophie and Emma became inseparable, their friendship weaving a bridge between 2 lives once separated by class and circumstance. Isabella found herself sitting in Caleb's modest apartment some evenings, learning that love lived not in mansions, but in the quiet rituals of shared meals, bedtime stories, and laughter echoing off walls too small to feel lonely. Caleb, in turn, found himself welcomed into her grand world, not as a pawn or a placeholder, but as something sturdier, something real. And slowly, without either of them meaning for it to happen, the marriage that had begun as a one-day illusion transformed into a bond neither of them could deny, not bound by papers or courts, but by something stronger. The weaving together of two families, stitched with courage, humility, and warmth. Caleb's shocking decision had never been about money. It had been about protecting a child, about showing Emma, and now Sophie, that love was not measured in wealth or titles, but in staying, in being present, in fighting when it mattered. And as seasons changed and laughter filled spaces once cold, a new story began to write itself. Not the story of a CEO and a janitor, not the story of wealth against poverty, but the story of two families, once worlds apart, finding home in each other. And this time, it wasn't for a day. It was forever. Sometimes, the smallest choices rewrite the biggest stories. Caleb's courage wasn't about money or power. It was about love, presence, and showing up when it mattered most. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heart-Woven Tales for more unforgettable journeys of love and resilience. And tell us in the comments, what does true love mean to you?